Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about poetry. Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to look at Ozymandias, 1818, by Percy Shelley. Some people pronounce this Ozymandias. There's various versions. I'm going to say Ozymandias. So, summary and brief context. This poem is about a huge, broken down statue of a great king, Ozymandias. The statue is described in detail by a traveler who saw it, and the main message seems to be that power does not last. Ozymandias is the Greek name for Pharaoh Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great, and the poem is based on a true incident. So this is Percy Shelley. So a little bit about the poet, 1792 to 1822, born in Horsham, England, died very young, aged 29, by drowning. He was tutored at home, but later went to Oxford University. Asked to leave Oxford for his seemingly extreme views, specifically atheism in this case. So, atheism means not believing in God, which in those days was considered to be quite a serious thing. He married Harriet Westbrook when she was 16 and he was 19. So, yeah, they did marry quite young in those days. This marriage did not last, however, and Harriet later killed herself. He then married Mary Godwin Shelley, so Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. And he was a romantic poet associated with other romantic poets such as Wordsworth and Byron. So remember the poem London that we've looked at before, that was 1794, publication date, and that was pre-romantic. The official start of Romantic period is 1798. So this was published in 1818. So it's in the middle of the Romantic period. And he was very interested in the theme of power. So here is the glossary for the poem. Please pause the video and learn these words, or at the very least, read through them 2 or 3 times, so that when you go through the poem, it makes it a lot easier. And these are some of the main techniques used in the poem. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to listen to an audio version and then we'll go through it. So the poem is read by the famous actor Richard Attenborough. Here we go.
I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed." And on the pedestal these words appear: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
Okay, so let's go through the poem now. So notice it starts in the first person. So this is the narrator, possibly the poet himself. It doesn't really matter in this case, but see that the most of the poem is then told in the third person in between these speech marks. Okay. So as it literally says, the narrator, the poet, meets this person who's been traveling. An antique land refers to Egypt. So antique means very old, but it also has connotations of precious. Okay. So in this case, we're talking about Egypt. And this traveler tells the narrator this story, right? That he saw this great big statue and he describes the statue. So, firstly, here he uses this word vast, means huge, trunkless. So, the trunk is the main part of the body, but he's saying that there was no trunk. Okay, so there was just these two huge legs of stone, and they were standing in the desert, as you can see there. And near them, so they're nearby on the sand, so there it is there, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. So visage means face, shattered means broken. So there's the face, and it's half sunk in the sand, and it's kind of broken as well. And the face is frowning. Okay, so frown means the opposite of smiling, and its lip is wrinkled, means like curved up. And that curving up also matches to this word here, sneer. Sneer means when you look down on someone, either by your expression or verbally. So in this case, his expression is one of looking down on people, of being very, very arrogant. And obviously, that makes sense because we're talking about Ozymandias here, a great king, a pharaoh. Okay, so pharaoh is what they used to call their kings in Egypt in those days. Cold command. There is a technique here, alliteration. So he was cold, he was arrogant, he was used to giving commands. And all of this can be seen in the face of the statue. And then the traveler says that because of the quality of the statue, you can see from that the sculptor who made the statue was a very, very good sculptor. He was able to read these feelings, these passions, the personality and character of the pharaoh and recreate them in the statue or in the face. And we can see those characteristics stamped on these lifeless things. In other words, the face and so on. Now, this line here is very tricky, so we're going to leave that for now until the second reading. And then, so up to there, it's not too difficult, really. This is the only line that's really tricky. And then the next bit is quite straightforward as well. So on the pedestal means base on here. These words appear. Now, they should really be here, but they've kind of been recreated here. So on the pedestal, it says these words here. Now, notice he's not just a king of people, of ordinary people. He's that, but also he's a king of other kings. He's the biggest king of all. He's an emperor. Because he says on this line, he's talking to the mighty. He's not talking to the ordinary people. He's saying to the other kings, look at me and despair. You will never be able to match my deeds, my achievements. And then the traveler carries on to say, the poem says, that apart from this statue, nothing else is there. And as you can see there in the picture, it's just sand now. So around the decay, so decay means broken down, of this colossal wreck. So here's a technique here as well, a bit advanced. Oxymoron, because colossal is another word for huge. So notice another word for huge, like vast. But colossal normally has positive connotations, whereas wreck is negative, it's a broken down thing. And here we have lots of alliteration, boundless and bare, lone and level, sand stretch far away. So apart from the statue now, there's nothing but sand, and the alliteration kind of adds to that effect. Okay, so hopefully that poem now makes sense. So remember AO1, to be able to read, understand, and respond to the poem using quotes and references. So we've read it, we've understood it, we've left one line out, but actually any poem, you don't have to understand it 100%. You need to understand most of it, and you only need 3 or 4 quotes, remember, and you respond. So here are some possible quotes, more than you need. So you can pick and choose from here. And here are the main techniques used. So adjectives, very good use of adjectives. Antique, vast, so 2 words for huge, and this connotations of precious. And in alliteration we've got here, cold command, and here. And a metaphor, we've got this line here, which we haven't looked at yet, I know. But don't worry, even if you don't understand that line, you can still get a very good grade in this for this poem. Okay, so AO2, language, form, and structure, plus techniques and terminology. So language, remember from the introduction videos, words and phrases, and then you have to talk about the effects and connotations. So this means thoughts and feelings and images that come to your mind and or heart when you read these words and phrases. This means alternative connotations. So for example, antique has connotations of precious. Okay. Now, form and structure. This poem is a sonnet. Do you remember what a sonnet is? It's a 14-line poem. And the poem begins in the first person, but most of the poem is in the third person. And in particular, Shelley uses alliteration, but also adjectives and metaphor. Okay, so a bit of context. Now here you've got more than you need for a grade 4 or 5, which is, remember what we're looking at to start with. You've actually got more than enough here for all the highest grades, which we'll talk about. So Shelley was a romantic poet. He was interested in the theme of power and was an atheist. So remember, this isn't to do with love. And as you can see, this poem has nothing to do with love. It's about feelings over reason, that kind of thing. And Ramesses, remember Ramesses the Great, Ramesses the Second, the great pharaoh king of ancient Egypt. His dates were 1303 to 1213 BC. So because we're talking about BC, these dates are in the correct order, which was a very long time for those days. 90 years he was around for. And Shelley's life, 1792-1822, coincided with the end of Napoleon's life, 1769 to 1821. So Napoleon was a French general who later declared himself emperor. So in many ways, he was very similar to Ramesses in his views on power and in his self-image. And in fact, it was Napoleon's conquest of Egypt that opened up that part of the world and its antiquities to Europe. So this means old, valuable, precious things, like statues. And Shelley's life also coincided with the main period of the British Empire. So from all this, we can see why the theme of power was very relevant at that time and why Shelley might have been interested in writing about it. Okay, so you have now learned more than enough to get a grade 4 or 5, depending on how you write your essay. Here is a quiz to test your understanding so far. So I'm not going to go through the questions, but please pause the video here and answer these questions. If you really struggle, it means you need to go back and listen again. If you get about 50% at least, that's fine. You can maybe carry on to the end and then come back, but you're aiming for 70%, 90%, okay? So please pause the video here and have a good go at these questions. I'm going to move on in 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Here are the answers. Please pause the video here and check your answers. If you really struggled, you need to go back. So I'm going to move on in 3 seconds. And, well, I should just say this first. So once you have mastered all these questions, all you have to do is to add a bit more detail and convert them into flowing sentences and paragraphs. So moving on 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So, for example, you might get a question like this. How does the poet present the theme of power in Ozymandias? Compare with one other poem in the anthology. So we're not going to do that here, but you could compare with London or My Last Duchess. Okay, I would recommend this one. And you might start like this. The poet presents the theme of power by describing the remains of a huge statue of Ramesses II and suggests that power does not last. He uses techniques such as adjectives and alliteration to do this. So your introduction is a brief answer, a quick summary of the poem, and just 1 or 2 techniques. And then you might have your first point like this. The poem begins in the first person, but most of the poem is in the third person. This has the effect of creating distance between the reader and the subject, which is appropriate given that the statue is far away in distance and time. Furthermore, the poet uses the adjective antique, which means very old, hence also distant in time. The adjective also has connotations of being precious. So this adjective here. So for grade 4 or 5, all you need is an introduction like that, about 4 paragraphs like that, and a conclusion, and you're well on your way to getting a good passing grade. If you're aiming higher, to grade 6 and above, let's carry on. So let's look again at the poem for these things here. So in terms of tone and mood, I would say they are similar. It's quite an objective, analytical tone from the poet, and the mood that's created is also very, very similar. In terms of rhyme and rhythm, so let's have a look at the rhyme. So land, stone, stand, frown. So land and sand rhyme. Stone and frown don't quite rhyme, but that could be maybe because the way we pronounce words has changed since then. So remember, this is more than 200 years ago. Command, read, things, fed. So read and fed rhymes. Command and things doesn't rhyme. Appear, kings, despair, decay. So appear and despair rhymes. And kings actually, strangely enough, rhymes with things. And then decay and away rhymes, and bear and despair rhymes. So you can see that the poem definitely rhymes as you would expect from a sonnet, but doesn't quite rhyme. There's a breaking down in the rhyme scheme. So that might link to what? Maybe to do with the breakdown of power and the breakdown of the statue. In terms of the rhythm, if you count the syllables, which I'm not going to do, you should find that they are mostly 10 syllables. Sometimes they are allowed to be 9 or 11, so be careful about commenting on that if it's just the occasional 9 or 11. But certainly you can talk about the rhyme scheme here. So we've got a sonnet, a 14-line poem with a regular rhyme and rhythm scheme, but where the rhyme occasionally breaks down. Now let's have a look a bit more on language form, structure, and context. Actually, we don't need to talk too much more about form, structure, and context because I think we've already covered more than enough for a grade 6 or 7, depending on how you write about those things. But we just need to go through this line here, which we missed out earlier. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. So there are different interpretations of this. I'm going to give you two, and then I'm going to tell you which one I think, and you may have your own ideas as well. So on the one hand, some people think that this refers to the sculptor, that the sculptor, by in the way that he created it, was mocking Ozymandias. But the problem with that is that if that's true, I mean, that makes sense for this bit here, but it doesn't make sense for this bit. So the other theory is that the line refers to Ozymandias himself. So in that case, the hand that mocked them would be the hand that metaphorically looked down on his people or on the other kings. And in that case, this would still make sense because although he mocked these other people, he also looked after them. He fed them metaphorically by running the country, running the government, by fighting other enemies and so on. So to me, that explanation makes more sense. You might have other ideas, and if you have your own ideas, then you're actually going beyond grade 6 or 7. You're going on to grade 8 or 9. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to move on now to the next slide. Okay, so there is an advanced quiz to test your understanding of what we've just discussed. Please pause the video here and answer these questions. I'm going to move on in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So here are some possible answers. So notice here I'm saying possible answers, okay? As we go up to higher grades, it's not about fixed answers, it's about how you give your answers. So please pause the video here and check your answers, and then moving on in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so you have now learned more than enough for a grade 6 or 7, and such a paragraph might look like this. So up to Here it's the same as before, and then you might add something like this. Shelley was interested in the theme of power, which was very relevant at the time. The British Empire was at its peak, and Napoleon's reign had recently ended. Shelley may also have been influenced by the suicide of his first wife, in the sense that not just power, but indeed nothing lasts. Okay, and then about 5 or 6 paragraphs like that would be more than enough to get you a grade 6 or 7. Now, if you're aiming for grade 8 or 9, it's not a case of more paragraphs, okay? It's then really more a case of how deeply you go into things, how insightful you are, how original you are, okay? It's about making sure that your whole essay from beginning to end is almost perfect, flowing nicely. But I'm going to give you some ideas here of grade 8, 9 possibilities. So, cold command, there's alliteration, but what are you going to say about it? You might say how the k sound is a very sneering sound. Yes. So the alliteration matches the sneering, the personality of the pharaoh. And this line here, if you can discuss the alternative interpretations and possibly give your view or maybe something completely different, that would definitely be grade 8, 9 material. You could explore the sonnet form in more detail, iambic pentameter, the unstressed, stressed, okay? And you could talk a bit more about Napoleon and the British Empire. Not too much though, okay? With context for poetry, you don't need a lot of context. So that's grade 8, 8 or 9. And if you can now finish off what the task we've started, the question, how does the poet present the theme of power in Ozymandias? That would be great. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed that video and found it useful. If so, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I will see you in the next video.